Okay, I figured I'd make a second video for today that's actually about books. And I apologize for my messy appearance. I'm not feeling well today, so I haven't shaved. Ooh. So I look a bit like the boogeyman, I'm sure. But what I wanted to talk about today was actually Bizarro fiction. I wanted to talk about my feelings on it and basically why I think it's important and why I think a lot of it can be very powerful, like particularly powerful. Um, and so I guess what I wanted to say is, I guess what made me start thinking about this was I was listening to, as I usually do when I'm upset, I was listening to the Marshall Mathers LP by Eminem. And for me, that album is, it's very much what I like about anything like art, you know, anything. But especially Bizarro fiction, what I like about Bizarro fiction is it can basically be the purest representation of what's going on in someone's head and what they're feeling and what they're thinking without a filter, without any limits. You know what I mean? You know, I'm a really weird person, and the things that go on inside my head are usually dark and a little wild and maybe a little crazy. You know what I mean? And I feel like Bizarro fiction allows people to express that in basically express that inner strangeness and the absurdity of life and their own feelings. And for me, see, I have the thing, the album, but for me, there's no other album that quite does that as well as the Marshall Mathers LP. Aside from some albums by Tupac, you know, like Me Against the World, I feel like that album does a very good job of expressing his frustrations and, you know, his struggles in his life during that time period. I feel like Tupac is one of the best artists who's ever expressed those emotions. But I feel like this album, in particular, has I think it got a lot of controversy because while sure Slim Shady is not like a total representation of who Marshall Mathers is. I feel like there was some honesty in a lot of the darkness. And tracks like Criminal, which are typically used as like a big like Eminem is homophobic, oh my god, type thing. I feel like tracks like that perfectly express his frustration with the hypocrisy and the ignorance of people who assume he's just a criminal because of the things he says on the tape. On tape, you know what I mean? Like the things he says in his music. And that particular track about lesbians, gays, and trans people like myself, you know what I mean, is basically him, and it's, you know, expressing that he's been under fire from, you know, GLAAD, you know, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance. During this time period, he was very much under fire for that, and for something totally inconsequential he had said in the Slim Shady LP. And he basically, not wisely, decided to express his frustration of being labeled homophobic and criminal. And he did that in the same way that he basically expressed that he was, you know, a criminal because of the way everyone, you know, had been talking about his lyrics, and basically said, you know, I am whatever you say I am. And so I feel like there's an honesty in that, that trollsiness, you know what I mean? In that darkness. And I feel like even tracks like the fucking opening track, Kill You, which is like almost entirely Slim Shady, that absurdity and that darkness and that misogyny, there's a truth in it that I feel like a lot of artists are afraid to express, that they have these dark feelings and these fucked up thoughts, and people don't always handle frustration and anger in a mature way, and sometimes it's absurd and sometimes it's nonsense, you know what I mean? And I feel like a lot of artists are afraid to express that just the absurdity of our emotions and the unpleasantness of it. And I guess what that brings me back to Bizarro fiction. So one of my favorite Bizarro fiction books is He Digs a Hole by Danger Slater. And I feel like, well, maybe not nearly as controversial as, or not even really controversial, but definitely not as dark and fucked up as the Marshall Mathers LP. I feel like it also expresses a lot of the ugliness inside of Danger Slater's head very well. And I feel like it does so in a way that wouldn't be possible outside of Bizarro fiction. And I've dealt with I've talked with friends who I really respect and I appreciate, who think that Bizarro fiction is very much one thing, and that the authors can't do anything else. And maybe that's true of some of them, and maybe it has become a little stagnant over the years. But I do think that there's something special about Bizarro fiction that should be preserved, and I do think there's some truth to the fact that these thoughts and these absurdities and this insane imagery and everything that Bizarro fiction is, I feel like there's I feel like the authors who express it can do so. Some of them can do so very well, and sometimes it's really the most accurate representation of what's inside their head. Like, people talk about the Marshall Mathers LP in the same way that it's Marshall Mathers, posing and doing all this dark, edgy stuff for the sake of it. But if you listen to it, it's very much what's going on inside his head, and it's very much what he's feeling. And all of this anger and all this violence and all this darkness is very genuine, regardless if he's literal about being a homophobe and, all of this shit. Like, regardless if he's actually shooting a bunch of people, Marshall Mathers is very genuine about what he is feeling. Whether the words match, whether someone actually sees fucking worm people, like in He Digs a Hole. You know what I mean? I feel like the emotion there is genuine, and the emotion there is best represented by the content, whether it's literal or not. And that's the parallel I feel, rap music and, Bizarro share. So, I guess what I'm saying is that the reason I like Bizarro fiction so much is that it has the potential to be more honest than anything else someone can write, short of an autobiography. And in some ways, I feel like it can be the best representation of who someone is. Another good example of that would be, there's a book by Carlton Melick, one of the few that I've read, called Stacking Doll. And I can't really imagine it being anything else than what it is. And while it's not nearly as extreme as the things that I mentioned, I feel like it very much represents, it says something, genuine and necessary about relationships. And I don't know, like, I feel like Bizarro fiction is special, and it should be preserved regardless of the current controversy that's been going on, and whether it evolves or changes in some way, or maybe it outlives its current form and it becomes something else. I feel like one way or another it's going to evolve and it's going to change, because there's weird people out everywhere, and the best way some of those people express themselves is through this weirdness. And so I'm really hoping to see more of it. And I'm really hoping that, like my friend Jeff Burke said, fiction needs to become angry again. And I agree with that, because there's a lot of injustice in the world, and there's a lot of things to be angry about. And I feel like the best fucking genre to do that in is Bizarro fiction. I feel like the best place to express the anger and the absurdity of the world is Bizarro fiction. And I really hope to see more Bizarro authors who do that, instead of, kind of some of the silly stuff, because I like some of the silly stuff, but I'd really like to see something genuine, you know what I mean? And I would like to see more Bizarro fiction that speaks to me. And even if, I was going to say, even if you dislike this album because it's problematic, I do recommend you listen to it, because it's, for me, it is one of the purest forms of art, and it is a fucking perfect album. Like, there's not a bad track on it, and for me, I think it is, it's up there with, you know, beautiful fucking literary works that inspire me, you know, regardless of its ugliness, because I feel like a lot of the beauty in fiction comes from the ugliness in what it says about us. Alright, well, I'm done rambling now. I love you guys. Bye-bye.